right, looks like we have a good group with us today, so we're going to dive in. So hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Alertus Power Lunch, which is all about leveraging custom event triggers. This session will focus on utilizing the custom event trigger setting in the Alertus console with a specific focus on NOAA weather and alert beacon examples. So today we're joined by Nick Phillips from the implementations team, who will be leading the conversation. And I wanted, before we pass it over to Nick, to let you all know that this is an interactive session, so please feel free to ask any questions, throw them in the chat or the Q&A feature, or raise your hand during this time so we can answer those for you. And also, I wanted you to know that this session is being recorded for training purposes. So if you want to be off camera, now would be the time to turn off your video. So recording is started, which is good. And without further ado, let's pass it over to Nick.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. So as mentioned, my name is Nick Phillips, and my role here at Alertus is implementation manager. Essentially, what my job is to do is to take whatever a solution that you've acquired from your account manager and to actually set it up, right? So I do both IT and project management related tasks. So I take you through all the phases from what is your server going to look like to getting everything actually set up so that it can be live and ready to go. So I'm going to share my screen. We're going to be working in the Alertus console today. So bear with me while I get that pulled up. Can you confirm, Brooke, that you see my screen? All right,
Yes, we
fantastic.
can.
All right, and I'm going to start my timer and boom, ready, roll. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about custom event triggers. And so what you see right now is the Alertus console. I'm not going to assume anyone's knowledge of Alertus, how long you may or may not have been with us, whether it's been 5 years or 5 days. So I'm just going to kind of touch on things that may benefit newer Alertus customers. So this is the home screen that you would log into, assuming you're on one of our newer versions. And so we're going to be diving into the particular area of custom event triggers today. So what are custom event triggers? Essentially, custom event triggers are our system attempting, or it's us setting up if then statements in our system. So if a panic button is pressed, then we send this alert. If we have a weather alert come in, a tornado warning, then we notify this group of people, right? So a custom event trigger is just that. It's a trigger for events, and we can do it in so many different ways across different organizations. So it is pretty customizable. So what we're going to do today is look at what does it look like to be in the Alertus console, looking at the custom event triggers page, along with a couple of examples. And then we'll wrap it up with some questions that you all may have. So I'm going to try to keep this as very general as possible. I'm not here to implement, although that is my habit. So I will try my best to make it applicable to everyone because there's a lot you can talk about with custom event triggers. So in your Alertus console, if you're an admin or with enough rights to configure your system, you will go to Configure System, and then Custom Event Triggers has its own little tab on the left. Okay. So what we're actually looking at right here is the implementation team's page. This is our server, and we have and these are all the custom event triggers. So what we'll start off with is understanding what this page really has. And then we'll jump into the actual custom event triggers themselves. Okay, so the first column, we see execution order. When custom event triggers are made, in your organization, you may not actually have this number of custom event triggers. You may really only care about one thing. Maybe you've got a panic button that you want to listen for, or a third-party integration that's triggering alerts, right? So execution order, however, is important if you need to make sure that the most restrictive things are at the top and then you make your way down. So there are cases in which you need to make sure that, let's say you've got a catch-all that's there to catch all other alerts in the system to kind of put them into an ignore pile or send an email or what have you. You need to make sure that those are at the bottom of the list so that it's not catching everything you actually want to send an alert for. So Execution order can be important. IDs, they are literally just an identifier tag. I Let's assume 77 is the highest number we have in here for IDs. Um, the next custom event trigger that's created will be 78, and then 79, 80, so on and so forth. That is for identifying which custom event trigger would have been triggered when we look at reports, right? Custom event trigger ID 77 was triggered by such and such. Okay. The name, pretty self-explanatory. That being said, whenever I work with customers on setting up either custom event triggers or alert devices or preset alerts, naming convention is always extremely helpful. So as you'll see, maybe there in our case, we've got initials, right? So we know whose it is and then what it is that we are building the custom event trigger for, so on and so forth. We don't always adhere to that, but essentially having a naming convention will help you navigate your own system so you know what is where and what it's going to do, right? They also kind of explain what's happening. The source is just an icon telling you what is the event coming in from. So this one's panic button. This would be a source from a button, whatever kind of button. This is a sensor event or a fire panel event, cap alerts. We've got a whole variety of different sources that our custom event triggers can be based on. Stop processing. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. You will notice though that they're all set to true, and I'll explain that here once we dive into it. And the rest of these are kind of self-explanatory. When was the custom event trigger last triggered? Is this actually enabled or not? Right? Do we actually want the alert to be? The custom event trigger to be on or off? Right? And then the final actions are edit if you wanted to change a custom event trigger or clone it or delete it. Cloning it can be pretty useful in case you want to make a similar but slightly different custom event trigger for your system. Okay, so let's dive into just what it would look like to create a custom event trigger from scratch. First thing, as I mentioned, is the name, right? So I actually have these saved from my cache. So the name, we're just going to do example CET, which custom event trigger, right? So this is the name. You can add a description if you'd like, if the name is not clear enough, but it's not required. Again, you determine if you want it to be enabled or disabled. Stop processing. So let's pause here for just a second. Stop processing means that as we were talking about the number of custom event triggers in your system, an example, let's go with you have 10 different weather alert triggers. Tornado warning, hurricane, earthquake, you got all the big ones in there, right? And they're ordered. So let's say we have a custom event trigger that is built for a tornado, and your tornado just happens to be the first one. Stop processing means is that once it matches that tornado, when the alert comes in or the event comes in and it matches tornado, it will stop processing. It'll say, oh, I've got my match, I'm good to go. If you disable stop processing, it will say, I've made my match. Are there any other matches? Okay. For the most part, it's pretty uncommon to need to match more than one event, but there are very unique scenarios in which that may be beneficial. But they are so few and far between that I probably couldn't come up with a good example off of the top of my head. So generally, stop processing is a good way to have it. Okay. So now we're moving on to what is the event that we are listening for? Where's it coming from, right? Is it coming as a sensor event or an RSS feed, a cap alert, panic button activation? Where is it coming from? For this example, we'll just do cap alert. Since we're on the topic of weather and it's on my mind, it'll provide us with a really good place to start with. So we are now listening in this example, custom event trigger, listening for a cap alert. The source is a cap alert. Now we need to determine what criteria specifically do we care about matching? What do we need to match? So maybe we want to match the event, right? So in the cap feed, there's going to be a whole bunch of different information, data, right? And we're going to turn it into information by reading it and saying, okay, the event in here, the operator, which will be, let's say, equals, right? So the event that's coming in from the cap feed equals tornado, if I could spell, warning. Great. Um, and we specifically say in this example event because that's what it says in the cap feed, not because that's what we're specifically looking for. If we chose something else, let's say severity, right? We could say if the severity is one of extreme or severe, right? Well, let's go back in there and actually add event back in. So event equals tornado warning, right? Whether this is capitalized or not capitalized, it really doesn't matter. But the actual characters do. Another variation you could do is uh, contains. So let's say the event contains tornado, right? That changes it up a little bit. Instead of specifically looking for a tornado warning, we're now looking for anything that says tornado, whether it's tornado watch or tornado warning. Okay. And not only that, but it is going to both be extreme or severe, and it has to deal with tornado. That's what this example so far has built out to look like. So let's assume that that's what we finish with. There's a whole lot more that could be added in here if desired, but we're going to just kind of stick with this for now. The action that we would want to take. So if these things match, then we will action to take, send preset alert. This is probably the most common thing that you're going to do with a custom event trigger is send a preset alert. It's generally what customers want to do is when something happens, they want to do something about it with an alert. And I don't know if we have any tornado ones in here, so we're going to say fire. So in this example, we're looking for this and we're going to send this particular preset alert. One thing before we jump into looking at a couple other ones briefly, just to show you some variety, this little advanced settings tab, I didn't talk about it yet because it's a little more advanced, but I would like to talk about that now to show you the depth of how complex it can get, albeit custom event triggers can still be simple, right? So as I mentioned, the two things that we are really caring about in this example are the severity and the event, right? 1 and 2. We don't, or not in this example specifically talking about, well, where is this coming in, right? If we are listening to, there's some backend configurations for weather that we're really not going to get into today, but let's say we're listening to the state of Arizona, right? Um, we don't want just anywhere in Arizona to trigger us if we're in one particular area, right? Arizona's pretty big. So what we would want to do is you can do it again a couple different ways. You can create your own locations in Alertus. What's the distance from that location? Or you could do something that's called geocode value. So geocode value is essentially like a county or a zone code. And then let's say any contain AZZ Arizona zone 001. And just to make sure, geocode, because in this pretend example that we're making up on the fly, we care about two zone codes. So Arizona zone code 002. Okay. So now we have 4 pieces of criteria. We don't care about anything that's outside of 001 or 002, but we do want to know if it's one or the other. So let's say matching in this advanced settings formula tab, we're matching 1 and 2. Let's put them in brackets to kind of keep them separate because we always want to match 1 and 2. And we also want to match either 3 or 4. Okay, so and number 3 or number 4, right? So now in this particular custom event trigger, we are always listening to the severity, always listening to that particular event, and we are triggering on either one of these two area codes. Okay. If it's AZZ003, it won't matter. If it's 1 or 2, it will trigger. And that's what is important to make sure you're building out correctly based on the complexity of your custom event triggers. To provide a little bit more detail to this, if we were to say, and, oops, again, spelling, um, this is a little bit different because now we are caring not only about the severity and the tornado, but it also has to apply to both of these counties. So it can't just, if the tornado was just in zone 1, but not in zone 2, this would not trigger because in this unique trigger, we are caring about 001 and 2, which is why when you build out your custom event triggers, you want to make sure you're doing it in such a way that the formula makes sense to what you're putting in. So again, this can get pretty complex. It can get into the weeds. It can also be pretty simple. So let's show you maybe an example of something simple. Let's create one. So let's do one where, again, example, your organization is a single campus site, but it's large enough for you to want to break it up into a north and south side, right? North campus, south campus. And you have alert beacons, which if you're not familiar, they are audible visual notification devices that we have, and they can also have buttons wired to them. You can have a whole bunch of different things wired to the alert beacons, but specifically in our example, we have buttons wired to them so that security personnel can smack that button, send off an alert. But we only want the alert to go to North Campus if it's from a North Campus button, and we only want South Campus to go to South Campus if it's from a South Campus button. So, what do you know? Already filled in Alert Beacon North Campus CET. So pretty explanatory name. I'm going to leave both of the enabled and stop processings in. All right, so the event source is going to be a panic button activation. And you could just jump right into the criteria, or if you want to make it a little bit easier, you can select which source is it coming from. So it's coming in from an alert beacon, right? And because there are a different number of ways that you can build out a similar custom event trigger, I'll show you a couple different examples. Still simple, but different. So one would be, let's say, device name, right? Going back to naming conventions, let's say all of your alert beacons start with North Campus Alert Beacon, North Campus Alert Beacon Room A, North Campus Alert Beacon Auditorium, right? All of these things, but they start with North Campus. Okay, so I'm just going to show you this real quick because I know my time is running low. North Campus. Okay, so with what I built here for the Alert Beacon North Campus custom event trigger, if a button is pressed and it's coming from an alert beacon whose name starts with North Campus, doesn't matter anything else after North Campus. If it starts with that, then send the preset alert for North Campus. One of the key things here is that you have to have the respective preset alert or behavior ready to go if you want to create it. If not, you'll have to go back and create it and just come in here. But for my example, we have when this comes in, send one for North Campus. Okay. If your naming convention doesn't work like that, maybe you're more on the IT side of things. Again, I don't know who all may be in the call and what your role is, but to keep it simple, IP addresses are a logical way of identifying your computer's network information. So we could change it to IP address. Again, we could do starts with, we could do equals, we could do a whole lot of things. But for this example, let's say your IP address starts with 10.1. And for you non-networking people, not to get too in the weeds, but there are different groups that you can create called subnets, sub networks. And so if your IP address starts with 10.1, in our fictitious example right here, 10.1 is for North Campus because that's how IT set it up. And then 10.2 is for South Campus, so on and so forth. So all of that to say, there are a lot of different ways that you can reach the same end goal with custom event triggers. It's just a matter of what is your need? What are you trying to do with what you're getting into your Alertus system? All that being said, they can be pretty complex. They can also be pretty simple. If you're already in implementations, or if you're currently in implementations, definitely lean on your implementations manager. If you're no longer in implementations, definitely reach out to your account manager if you have any questions. And we also do have our help portal. I think Brooke actually has a couple links that may be useful for getting familiar with custom event triggers, even one specifically for weather alerts if you're licensed. I don't know who all is licensed for what, but we've got some articles in our knowledge base at help.alertus.com. And I think my timing is actually perfect. So 20 minutes is on the dot. Thanks so much. Brooke, pass it back to you.
You crushed it, Nick. Thanks so much. Yeah, so I'm gonna put in the chat those links that Nick talked about. So give me a second. So there's one for just general, and then there's one for those NOAA weather alerts. And now we have a little bit of time if there is anyone with any questions. I don't see any in the chat or in the Q&A. So if anybody wants to come off mute or raise their hand to ask one live. Oh, chat is disabled. I'm so sorry. Okay, let me re-put that in the chat. All right, can you all see that now? Great. Great. Thank you for letting me know that, Donna. I appreciate that. Cool. So those are your links there. Does anyone have any questions before we end for the day?
I can tell you this, if there are no questions, that just means I did a really good job. Or that this was way confusing and you wouldn't know where to start. So either extreme.
I think the first one for sure. We're getting some great validation in the chat for you. Donna and Greg said, great job.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. All right. Well, if there are no questions, as Nick said, feel free to peruse these links if you have anything in the future, or reach out to your account manager for anything more specific. We did just get one question actually before we roll out, Nick. So this is for you. It says, James asked, in the example where you have stop processing, if you didn't have that enabled and, for example, had an earthquake and tsunami, would it send separate alerts?
Well, the stop processing wouldn't really apply there because I'd imagine we would have in this example, two separate custom event triggers set up, one for earthquake and one for tsunami. So those would be two separate triggers that would evaluate on their own, and they would both apply regardless of whether it was enabled or disabled. It would be, so to answer your question, they would still send their alerts regardless of stop processing. It would be more applicable if you had multiple earthquake alerts that you wanted to potentially trigger for different reasons. So to keep it simple, I would just say a good practice would be leave stop processing enabled, because it's very likely it's not going to apply to your scenario. But that's where good questions like these come up, and you can ask your account manager, support team, or implementations manager your very niche specific questions. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, definitely. James says thank you. All right. Anything else before we sign off? All right. Well, thank you all for being with us today on your Friday lunchtime maybe, or whatever coast you're on, maybe not. But thanks for being today on a Friday. And this is recorded, so if you want to access it again, just once again reach out to your account manager and they can send it to you. I believe it also will send out to everyone in a few days who has registered for this event. But thank you, and I hope you have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Have a good one, everyone.
And thanks again, Nick. You did a great job.
Thank you. Bye.